Phil, everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about today. I can't imagine a better way for me to get to start a new year than getting to talk to a lot of people about what I do for Michelin. Tell you a little bit about Michelin because I'm proud of the company and I like to brag just a little bit. Talk to you a little bit about communication brands, and I know we're going to end up on social media. So thank you so much. I've really been looking forward to this and think for me, as I said, it's a fun way to start the new year. Now I'm going to try to get this presentation going just a little bit. In the best Michelin tradition, we love to have an agenda. So I have an agenda for you. I will pause on the agenda just for a minute, tell you a tiny little bit about my background. It may or may not matter as I go through, but started my career as a journalist, as a print journalist. Oddly, after a few years in which I got kind of lucky with some stories that I covered, I was asked to join the faculty at Auburn University, even though we lost the football game. I'm still going to say War Eagle. We had a good year. So, yay, I've got one friend in the audience. So I was on the communication faculty, the journalism faculty at Auburn for more years than I should probably count because it was a long time. From there, I did an unusual thing in that I left a tenured faculty position to go into corporate work. I ran communications at CNN. Including on the digital side. So I had the fabulous experience of working in communications in the early internet days. That was my original area of responsibility at CNN. From there, I went to Burger King Corporation where I ran global communications. I did some time at the College Board, which, among other things, owns the SAT, standardized testing. I ran communications and marketing there, and now I am here at Michelin. So if you'll bear with me for just a minute, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this company that I am so proud to work for. I run communication and brands for Michelin North America, US, Canada, and Mexico. As you know, Michelin is a large global company, and we are active all over the world. The company globally, for example, employs, I think it's roughly 120,000 people, but I'm going to talk mainly about North America. You can see we've got about 22,000 employees, sales in North America. And slides a little bit off, but 2012 or 10 billion. You can see where some of our locations are. So it gives you a little perspective about who we are in North America. As I talk more about what I do, in the broadest sense, I can tell you that my job is to promote and protect the company. So my job is to promote and protect Michelin North America. I am very fortunate to work for a company that has good stories to tell. I get to tell good stories. Michelin North America, for example, we've gotten more than 4 times the number of J.D. Power awards than all the other tire companies combined. When I look back on my career, I have not necessarily always been with companies that had good stories to tell. So for example, if we pause just for a second and think about Burger King, really interesting company, large, does really interesting things, but I know all of you know, and probably better than I, it has some challenging stories to tell, right? Fast food industry, increasingly health conscious, employee relations, for example, Burger King's employees outside the corporate structure, in other words, restaurant level employees aren't provided with health insurance. Those are sometimes more challenging stories to tell. By the way, Burger King, you might be interested to know, was one of the first companies to venture onto Facebook, back when it was still almost being used just for college students. It was an interesting experiment for us. I'm bragging a little bit more about how great Michelin tires are in that slide, but I'm going to get now, everybody kind of has a sense of what Michelin is in North America, in that big structure. Now, I said in the big sense of the word, my job is to promote and protect Michelin North America. And I'm showing you the organization here. This is not an unusual structure for a communications function in a large company. There is no such thing as, in communication and brands, there's no such thing as the structure that everyone uses. This is not an unusual structure. So my area of responsibilities include external communication. You will notice we functionally consider social media separate. Many companies now say external communication. A lot of people call that PR or media relations. A lot of companies are now saying, you know what, social media is definitely part of external communication. We've kept them separate for a couple of organizational reasons, but also we believe social media has a very powerful impact on internal communications too. It can have an impact on community relations, etc. So for that reason, structurally, we put social media in sort of a different bucket. My function also includes internal communication, so we communicate on a regular basis with all our employees here in North America. That's about 22,000 employees here in North America. Image and brands, very important to us. Part of that is maintaining our brand standards. Everyone knows the Michelin Man, right? We're responsible for ensuring that he is used and represented in ways that are consistent with the global company's desires. But that also is very important to social media. Part of our image and brand function includes media placement. So if you see a Michelin advertisement on television, my department has made the decision that we're going to run at that time on that television station, and we have purchased that advertising. This is going to be a little more important as I talk later on about social media and paid social media strategies. So part of the function of image and brands is paid social media. Again, not a terribly unusual organization for companies, for corporations. I will put Michelin development and community relations together, but Michelin strives to be good citizens in the communities where we operate. So we participate in charitable activities. We're very, very active in education. That's our focus. Michelin development is a function that provides loans and business expertise to companies to help them grow and create new employment. You can see, or you can imagine how there might be social media opportunities around community relations. And we may have a chance to get to that later on. So that's our structure. As I've mentioned, my job in the broadest sense is to promote and protect the company. 10 years ago, I would have stopped there. I would say, that's my job. You ask me what my big job is, protect and promote the company. The world has changed very dramatically, I think in very positive ways. It's due to social media, in my opinion. So I would tell you now, my job is to protect and promote the company, but create a brand experience that drives engagement, in other words, two-way conversation, and deepens emotion. That's a really dramatic change, right? Go back 10 or 15 years. We didn't expect companies to respond to us, did we? You talk about having an emotional connection with a company, people have said, well, that's kind of odd, isn't it? An emotional connection? Social media. We want to engage with organizations. We have emotions around that. I think it's all extraordinarily positive. And so that's really what we're about now in communications and brands. Oh, it went back. I did just fine on my own. Can you go back to the, that's it. I love this quote. Warren Buffett is so right. So my job is to protect and promote the company, drive engagement and emotion. Warren Buffett reminds me that particularly due to the advances in social media, I can do my job really well and my team can do its job really well. But think about all the companies everyone in this room is aware of that have had something in social media that went, as we say, viral, and everything about the company changed very dramatically, very quickly. Almost always that's negative. We might be able to think of a few positives, but generally speaking, it tends to be a negative. Social media is impacting companies' reputations in very profound ways. So I want to be sure that I put social media in context. It's only one element of what we do. Surround sound, as I like to say. I'll get back to that term in a minute, but if my job is to protect and promote a company, enhance its reputation, drive emotion, we have to do that with all relevant audiences. We can't just say, hey, we only care about the social media universe, right? We'd be leaving out, so we have to think about all relevant audiences. The traditional media, so newspapers, television, radio, extraordinarily important. Extraordinarily important. I can't emphasize enough that traditional media is a large part of what we do, and it is still probably the most effective way to reach the most people, either paid or earned. We can't emphasize that too much. I separated digital influencers. I separated that because at Michelin, we're very focused on the people who are passionate about driving, about their cars, about their tires. There are communities of people, online communities, that are very, very actively engaged. And they are very, very interested in tires. They're experts on tires. That matters to us. So much so that we consider that a separate audience, and we have staff who work with them and communicate with them very, very regularly. So I've said several times, promote and protect, engage, drive emotion. Michelin is, it's certainly a large company. We see a lot of volume. This kind of volume, depending on the business, is very, very typical. I draw your attention to this sort of volume because that's a lot of content, right? About our, that's a lot. It would be interesting to know what kinds of content, for example, Procter & Gamble draws, but the world that we live in now, again, primarily driven by this huge upswing in participation from the average person, there's just an enormous volume every day about every company. I think it's very, very exciting and interesting, and it's changing. But I always like to remind people who say, oh, journalism is dying, and newspapers, and oh, it's so terrible in broadcast, the readership is going down. Yeah, but there's this enormous surge of people who are getting content about companies just in different ways. It's really quite exciting. I love little factoids. I think these are some that are pretty interesting. 60% of people boycotted or bought less from a company due to what they considered poor leadership behavior. And guess where they found out about most of that poor leadership behavior? Social. Social. Think how many times in the last year you have learned something about a company. And we say leadership, we don't literally mean Joe or Jane. We mean sometimes Joe or Jane, but often about the positions the company takes. Where did you learn about a lot of that? Where did you see that others were aware of that? Others were engaging around that topic. It's social. Revolutionary change. Consumers consider employees the single most credible ambassador of any organization. I say revolutionary change. If all of us think back, let's go back again, I'll use 15 years. We think about if an employee had something good or bad to say about a company or its products, good or bad, what options did they have? What did that single employee, what option did that single employee have 15 years ago?
A letter to the editor.
A letter to the editor. Kind of it, right? They could call the local media. How well did that work? Someone who doesn't know how to deal with the local media, never done that before, calls them and says, hey, I got to tell you. It was not very effective. Think about the way employees are empowered today to talk about their companies and their products. A byproduct of employee empowerment has been that corporations have said, gosh, our employees are empowered, therefore we need to be more transparent with them. We need to tell them what is going on in our company because they're talking to people about us via social channels. And the result, in my view, is that companies are doing an extraordinarily better job of communicating with their employees because their employees are empowered by social media. You know, and interestingly, there's a very famous study, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. I believe it's called Gemini study, but I can't be trusted on that. It asked employees globally a lot of questions, but one of the questions it asked was, would you leave your current company if you got a job offer for, I think the range was 10 to 20% more money? Would you leave right now? Tremendous correlation between employees who believed that their company communicated with them, told them what was going on, and tremendous correlation. The employees who believed that their companies communicated would say, no, I'm not going for that. I'm not leaving the company. Those people who reported their companies did not communicate well with them were very, very likely to leave. We all know that when employees leave for other companies, there's an enormous expense, both in terms of lost knowledge and simple monetary replacement of the person. Social media, powerful, powerful impact there. In the interest of time, and we're going to get to questions in just a minute, but in the interest of time, I will only say that we now think about the communications landscape as paid, owned, and earned. That's what we all talk about now. Paid, owned, and earned. Paid, traditional advertising. That TV ad I mentioned earlier, that's paid. Owned, that's our website, right? That's Michelin.com. That could be our owned Twitter accounts, our owned Facebook. Paid, owned. Earned is traditional public relations, right? We call the newspaper, the TV, and say, gosh, we want you to write about this. We want you to cover this. We also count earned as what we call organic social media, right? So whether it started in a paid or it started in an earned way, but if in the social universe people start picking up news about our organization and they are proliferating it into the social universe, that's earned. So we think about paid, owned, and earned. We can't think about those separately anymore, as we could have. There wasn't a lot of this 15 years ago, but we think always now of paid, owned, and earned. One other point that I'll make, I've been getting at, sheer volume. 1985, a big news story, huge news story, would have been about 100 mentions. That's like, oh, your company's doing something great or you're in crisis. 100 separate items of news coverage. You look today, 10 million. It's stunning, isn't it? I mean, that's a stunning amount of volume. And I'll stop at this slide, and then we'll go into questions from here. We used to talk about news cycles, right? There's morning news, maybe there's afternoon news, there's even news. We don't talk about that anymore. We talk about information cyclones. Huge amount, huge volume. We don't know what this world is going to look like 5 years from now, right? Who'd have thought of Twitter would be so important 5 years from now? Twitter is quickly becoming the #1 channel by which people complain to companies. It's a pretty powerful channel. Any of you use Twitter to complain? Airlines, huge with airlines, huge with airlines, huge in lots of other industries, but the rules and the boundaries are changing. I've mentioned employees communicate internally and externally. This swirl communication, everything becomes wrapped together now. Employees on social talking about their companies become part of that information cyclone. And it moves in waves. Next time you see a big news story about a company, it's really interesting. Watch it. Watch where's it going. News breaks, social picks it up, company handles it, and it begins to move in ways with lots of participants. Something we think about a lot at Michelin, and all corporations do now, is that content now lives forever, right? It lives forever. We read lots of stories these days about kids and social media. They have ridiculous pictures on Facebook, and they're going to regret it when they start interviewing for jobs. But that's also true about companies. So we're going to go back. 1995 was when news sites really started to proliferate on the web. But before that time and before Google, there's a bad story about a company or a good story. It pretty much lived and died real quickly, right? Were you going to go down to the library and look it up and then, review it with your friends? No. But today, Google something, and it could be something negative from 2 years ago, 5 years ago. There it is. Content lives forever digitally. Search we're getting to this again, but there used to be sort of a hierarchy of things. There is no longer in the world. The small local newspaper, I grew up in Alabama, so the Gadsden Times can become just as an important a source, or my next door neighbor somewhere in Alabama can be important a source of information as the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. Transparency and honesty have always been essential in the kind of work I do, but as we all know now, if companies don't tell the truth, it will out, right? It may not be today, and it may not be tomorrow, but an employee will in fact say, company, you have been saying these things, but let me tell everybody the truth. So companies have to tell the truth. I am fortunate to work for an organization that is very values and ethics driven. I have friends in communications at other companies. Some companies have less of a tendency to be transparent and to be honest about what's going on in their companies. And it's putting real pressure on them because the truth always outs now. Last thing I say, and then I promise I'm going to stop. Latent publics become easily converted to active publics. So by that we mean, again, social has empowered people to get behind something who wouldn't have been activated before. They would simply have sat back and watched the news go by. Think of big stories that have been in the news recently. Again, whether they're good or bad, people who wouldn't have participated in that. It could be by donating money, for example, a tragedy. It could be by saying, I'm going to join all these people who will never buy that product again, or I'm going to join all these people who will buy that product because of what this company did. So people who would have been mere observers at best are now actively engaged. So I will stop there. If anyone has questions, I'm glad to try to give a whirl at them. I saw some that some people had in mind in advance that were really interesting. Yes?
What tactics do you use to combat misinformation, particularly in the social media world?
You know, that's a great question, and I'll try to be a little bit vague, but right now we're dealing with a person on social media. We're at Michelin. This person is very active in social media. So just imagine that person may have a lot of followers or friends or whatever. And this person is saying our products are unsatisfactory when in fact we know the facts around that, right? And that's not accurate. It's something companies deal with all the time, and companies struggle with knowing how do we, that's your question, right? How do we deal with it? You know, different companies have different strategies. Some companies like to take it offline immediately. So if a company's unhappy, they'll take it offline. Would you send me your phone number? Would you send me your email address? They want it offline fast. Sometimes that's not well received by the social community. If a company appears to take it offline, what are they hushing the person up? Did they, pay them to suddenly stop on the topic? Our tendency is to try to resolve it as best we can in that social channel, but it is very difficult on the negative side. On the positive side, it can be a wonderful thing, right? You get someone who is active in social channels, and that person has a good experience with your company and product, and they tell their friends, boy, is it ever powerful. It's really powerful. Anything else?
I've got one right here.
Sure.
We work with the state, and there are a lot of small companies in here that do not have the staff that you have, and the budget you have, so I don't know how you manage what you manage, or how many other people manage, as everything continues to change, and you get lots of sponsors involved.
Yeah. It's a great question, because everything I've talked about means more people, right? One way or the other, it means more people, or ignoring, a very important element today. If you ignore social channels, right? You can do it. Anybody know that real famous case, United Breaks Guitars? Anybody know I won't go into it now, but it's a great case study. Google United breaks guitars, but they weren't aware, United wasn't aware of what was going on in social channels. So the first thing I would say, any company, big or small, the most important thing it can do is have, and whether it's government or not, there needs to be monitoring person or software in place, because if an organization is unaware of what's happening in social, it can miss that very positive opportunity when people are saying, hey, this great thing or this great product. If you're not listening, if you're not monitoring, you're missing it. But it's also really important, if something negative is starting to happen, that you know it before it gets too late. Too late in terms of millions of pieces of content. Think how fast things can move now. And if people get behind something, how quickly it goes. If you're not monitoring and listening, you don't know that. There's monitoring software of all costs, you know, and of all values, but that's the first thing I would say is have someone who's watching Facebook and somebody who's watching Twitter, or a person, which can be sometimes less expensive, or monitoring software. And then thereafter, you have to figure out what your budget allows. I'm trying to think, I think it's AT&T in the U.S. I can't be trusted on this, but we heard that we use monitoring software and an outside agency to help us with that. But I believe it's AT&T has something like 50 people who just do social in the U.S. That's a lot of people, right? It's a lot of people. So I don't know if that helps. Yes?
A follow-up to his question. How do you handle the information cyclone that comes with, you know, a multinational corporation while continuing to maintain reputation?
That is also a really good question. So it's always been the case that if there is a big story, an information cyclone. So you remember in 85 we said 100 pieces of content. That would have been a huge amount to those teams at that time. I remember being at CNN when various things broke, and I would literally get, within an hour's time, 50, 60 phone calls. That was before social. And my staff and I would be completely overwhelmed. We just couldn't deal with the volume. We happened to be fortunate enough to have an external agency that can support us if we need it. And it's a real common way that large companies deal with this. On a daily basis, we don't need them. They're not helping us. We're not paying them. But if we have a huge amount of volume, they have the staffing resources to help us so that we're appropriately responsive. It can be really challenging, and as you watch information cyclones happening around you, sometimes it's really easy to see that a company is quite literally overwhelmed by the volume, that they could have responded in a different or better way, but they don't have the volume, they don't have the arms and legs to respond. And we're just fortunate enough that we prepare for that by having this agency that knows us well, and when volume gets large, they step in and help us out. It's a good way to handle that, because it saves us adding lots of staff that wouldn't be occupied all day, every day. Yeah.
Who are the digital influencers for Michelin, and are there any individuals
The digital influencers it's all individuals who are very active in these communities that talk about cars, driving, tires. Before I came to Michelin, I didn't realize people would be so passionate about tires. But there are people, I mean, they are really passionate about tires. They know as much as the people who work at Michelin or Bridgestone or Goodyear, but depending on which kind of tire, which I'm passenger car tire, you know, there are all kinds, but there are dozens and dozens of these very active communities. And yeah, sometimes people within those particular communities sort of rise to the level of awareness. There are people on my teams who could give you names, phone numbers. They're in touch with them. They've gotten to be friends, colleagues, because of their involvement in digital communities. It's really interesting. Pardon? Could be. Yeah. Yeah.
That's going to get us for time. A round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Before you sit down, does this mic still work? Before you sit down, so I get a question because I get a microphone, so I get to ask you one last one. So someone brought this up. This was part of the questions that we had beforehand, but someone said, you know, you're the marketing and communications and social media person for Michelin, and when I go to find you on LinkedIn, which all of us nerds are on, we didn't find you on there. Now there's something behind all that.
Capacity. I was, although I'm flattered that you looked, thank you. I was an early adopter of LinkedIn. I think it's terrific. It's just capacity time for me. For example, I'm active on Facebook, but only privately, not professionally at all. But it's interesting you mentioned that. I made a New Year's resolution, and I'm not a New Year's resolution maker kind of person. I'm going to be back on LinkedIn soon.
I think you getting.
But will
you
you
on
be?
LinkedIn,
Will you send me an invitation? I mean, will I get to?
Did you just ask me if I would be your friend on LinkedIn? Because I would do that for you.
Really?
Yes, I would.
Wow. Okay, I have one friend.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, Edna Johnson.